Hello and welcome. This is Matthias 76. Together, we are decoding the deception, and we are here today with Paul on the second missionary journey. And we probably ought to just take a look at the map just to catch us up with what is going on. So we'll pick up here. Paul was in Philippi. He comes down here to Berea. He stops along the way, and we have to zoom in to see this. He stops here at Thessalonica, and now he's going on down. He alone is going down to Athens. That is where he is going to be. We're going to pick him up speaking today. And don't miss, we talked about this last time along the way. He passed Mount Olympus, that seat of the Greek gods. I want to pop the thumbnail up for today's video. This is just an image artist's rendition of Paul speaking at the Areopagus with the Greek philosophers that he is going to encounter there. I want to talk just a little bit about worldview. We can think that this world is very different than ours, and it was. It was very different from our world, but there are ways that it is the same, and we can get insight into that by spending just a moment looking at and examining Paul's worldview of what was going on here. Because if we do that, what we're going to see is this, that Paul's worldview of what was going on, and we'll call it behind the scenes, in his day here in these places, Philippi, Thessalonica, Berea, Athens, and soon Corinth. What was going on there is very similar to what is going on today. Yes, things have changed, but what has not changed is who the power players are behind the scenes. And that is important. That has not changed. All understood full well, and I want to pull up the thumbnail from our last video. Over here, this is the thumbnail from the last video, and we've got an apostle planting a flag in territory. And if you notice, you look, that's the Mediterranean world. And we've got the apostle Paul popping down a flag as though he is claiming that territory. Paul understood his role. He understood his mission, his purpose as reclaiming the nations. And we talked about that last week, and it's in the title of the video, Winning Souls and Reclaiming the Nations. Reclaiming the nations, that talks about conquest, what this image was created to represent. It speaks of conquest. It talks about territory and taking that territory. Now, Paul didn't believe himself to be liberating Thessalonica from the power of Rome in a worldly sense, in a sense of the earthly governance of that territory. He didn't view himself as going to Athens to wrest it from the power of Rome. That's not the way he saw it. It was a spiritual conflict in which he was engaged and in which we are engaged. Jesus said, go make disciples of all nations. And we've just got to train ourselves so that when we hear that word nations, we go right to the Tower of Babel, right to the Tower of Babel, where God assigned the nations to the lesser gods, the created spiritual entities. And that word God simply means the word God in Greek, whatever you want to pick, Hebrew, Egyptian, but God simply meant spiritual entity, a spiritual entity. Okay. God, the Lord High God, the King of Kings, the Lord of Lords, the Almighty, created other gods. And we refer to them most commonly, and inaccurately probably, as angels. He created those gods before he created us. And when the nations rebelled, he assigned the nations to the care of the gods, the B'nai Elohim, the sons of God. That's what B'nai is. Elohim is God, sons of God. He assigned the nations to them, and they rebelled. That's how we end up with Ra and Osiris and all the others in Egypt. It's how we end up with Poseidon and Zeus in Greece, and on we can go around the globe. They wear different masks, all with the intent of deceiving the nations. Do you wonder why all of these ancient religions and even the religions today are all so similar? Different entities, different gods playing the same roles with different titles in these different nations. They ruled the nations. They rule the nations, and they all serve their dark lord Satan, who is above them all. Now, for us, you may hear me saying this and think, this guy's lost his mind. He's out of his gourd. He has no idea what he's talking about. That's not what I've learned. And that may be that it's not what you heard, but I can tell you it's exactly what Paul thought. It is what Deuteronomy 32 teaches us. Let's go there. Deuteronomy is Moses' farewell sermon. And in that, he says, when the Most High, the one high, Lord God, there's only one true God overall, when the Most High gave the nations their inheritance, when he divided mankind, he fixed the borders of the peoples. Paul is going to talk about this very stuff in our text for today, if I ever get to it. According to the number of the sons of God, B'nai Elohim is exactly what that says. But the Lord's portion is his people, Jacob, his allotted inheritance. What did God do right after the Tower of Babel when he assigned the nations to the other gods? And he said, keep them in line, make them behave, enforce justice. I'll get back to them. I'm going to start a new nation with this guy named Abraham, and I'm going to call him. All of the assigning the nations, the dividing of the nations, and giving them allotted territories and deities to rule over them, that's Genesis 11. Genesis 12 is the call of Abraham. And his plan of salvation was brought about through that one nation. And then with the fulfillment of that plan of salvation, Jesus said, go and make disciples of all nations. And we have the day of Pentecost, 50 days after Jesus' resurrection, the day of Pentecost, when it's made very clear they're to go to those very nations and carry the message. And that is what Paul, back over to our thumbnail from last week here, that is what Paul understood himself to be doing. Exactly what he saw himself and the other apostles and all of the Christian church as doing. And that's why he's going to go today and speak to these Greek philosophers who are going to think he's just insane with what he's saying. But that's why he's going to go to these Greek philosophers and speak and teach. He understood this to be his mission. Okay. So here's where the commonality with us comes. Yeah, things have changed. We don't wear those funky robes anymore, and we don't build buildings out of marble anymore, but it's still the same powers behind the scenes running everything. And frankly, and I'll say something that may seem radical, and it is radical to our thinking, but it is truth, and truth is often radical to us. The gods of old have more power today than they did then. I'll say it again. The gods of old, wearing whatever guises and disguises that they wore, Zeus, Poseidon, Hades, they have more power today than they did then. They have done what? They have united all the nations. They kind of did that through Rome, but that was just in part of the world. They've united all the nations. Everyone is walking in lockstep through that organization called the United Nations, through that organization known as the World Economic Forum, on, Council on Foreign Relations, wherever you want to go, Trilateral Commission, on and on. They have united the world and consolidated their power. And in doing that, if you study these different organizations that have taken over the governance of this world, because there is no difference between those who rule in Europe and those who rule in the United States and those who rule in Asia. They all answer to the same powers. They're all sold out the same celestial, not so celestial host. And that's how they govern. And then we wonder, how can the world be as sick, evil, and twisted as it is? Well, I can tell you why. I just told you why. They are serving the lords of hell, so is it any surprise that they behave like the lords of hell? And make no doubt that they rule. And the easiest place to point with that, and I go to it all the time, Jesus' temptation by Satan. When Satan said, took him to a high mountain, showed him all the kingdoms of the world in a moment's time, and said what? If you but bow down and worship me, all these I will give to you. Jesus didn't tell him he was wrong. Jesus knew that in this time, Satan has control over the world. So the same struggle today as Paul had is what we are engaged in. We are carrying on that work, and we're reclaiming the nations through the proclamation of the gospel. Why do those lords of darkness, the gods of old, have more sway today than they did then? Because the church has given it to them. In seizing control over the world, those earthly entities that serve the heavenly entities, whether it's Skull and Bones, the Council on Foreign Relations, the United Nations, the Vatican, they have seized power in the church, the teaching of the church. It's where many of the wild and horrible teachings in Christendom today come from, the misleading and deceptive teachings come from. And because the gospel is not being preached, because the gospel is not being proclaimed in all of its truth and power and purity, because its power comes from its truth, and that must be proclaimed in all honesty and purity. It's because that gospel is not being preached and proclaimed that they have more and more and more and more power. They have power to mislead. They have power to rule. They have power to destroy. They have power to deceive. Now, what I have just told you, there are all kinds of people who are awake to the fact that the world is completely mad and the different organizations behind the scenes that run all of that. A lot of people will talk about that. Now, I say a lot. What, maybe 5-10% of people in the world are in the know about that? Probably honestly less. But the percentage of people who understand that it is a spiritual struggle, it is a spiritual battle, that's what's going on, I don't even know what that percentage would be. It would have a decimal point and then some zeros before it. Why? Because the church isn't teaching this stuff. It's not. It's not. Why? Because most of the power in the church has been seized long ago. Or there are people who, just like me, up until some years ago, I was ignorant of all of this. And then I came across Dr. Michael Heiser, and I read his work, Unseen Realm, the work of the Divine Council, all of these things, Reclaiming Herman. And that opened my eyes to a lot of this. And I wondered, with all the education that I've had and all the reading and study that I have done, why I had never seen it anywhere. The church hasn't been teaching it. And that's, we could talk about that for a long time. But anyway, this view is held by this understanding. It's possessed by very few. So yes, it may seem strange. I encourage you, check it out. I encourage you, go read Michael Heiser's work. Check it out. You can find it in the theological section and books on my website, decodingthedeception.com, and you can see what those books are. And I never can remember his scholarly work is called Unseen Realm, meaning it has a lot of footnotes in the original languages, and there is the other version of that. There it is. Decided rather than hanging my head against the wall through the magic of editing, I would pop it up on the screen. The book is called Supernatural, and if you haven't read it, well, you should. You should. He's going to talk about this worldview, this understanding. He's going to lay out the biblical underpinnings of this and show how it formed the thinking of all of the people we think of in Scripture. This is the worldview they had, and it is the accurate worldview. So go read that. You click right there. It's going to take you to the Amazon page where you can buy the book in paperback. You can read Reversing Herman. Good stuff. And it is key to really understanding the scriptures, especially understanding the scriptures as it relates to what's going on in our world today. But let's get to the text. Let's get to the text about Paul in Athens. So he had gone by himself, and people took him down to Athens. His compatriots stayed there in Berea and continued to preach and teach there. That was the way things often would go. Paul was the lightning rod because he was this guy over here with the banner, sticking it in the ground, claiming the territory. And so after he had to leave, others would stay and teach. Silas, Luke, Timothy. They would stay and teach, and he would advance on and start work somewhere else, and then they would follow him. So now, while Paul was waiting for them at Athens, his spirit was provoked within him as he saw that that city was full of idols. So he reasoned in the synagogue with the Jews and the devout persons, and in the marketplace every day with those who happened to be there. So what do we see here? He was teaching in the synagogue, definitely. Not going to talk a lot about what went on in the synagogue. And of course, there was a synagogue in Athens. It was a major center of the world, and there were many Jews there. But Luke isn't going to focus on what Paul was doing here, talking to the Jews, because now we're going to have an example, really for the first time, of Paul engaging with complete Gentiles, people who had no exposure to Judaism whatsoever. And not that he probably hadn't come across this before, but this is the first major instance of Paul teaching, preaching, discussing theology with Gentiles, Greeks. It says his spirit was provoked within him. It's the response that he has to this idolatry. It's just their idols everywhere, and it's completely devoid of any foundation in the true God. And so it gets him worked up. He's got to say something. He's got to do something. And so what does he do? And he goes to the marketplace every day and talked with those who happened to be there. So he's going to the common area of the city, the marketplace. And that's what people did back in the day. They didn't sit in their own homes and watch YouTube Shorts videos. They didn't even, like in the days of my grandparents, sit on the front porch because it was hot in the house and sit in the front porch and talk with neighbors, etc. Here, they would go to the marketplace. That's where you found people. That's where people hung out. The kids would play. The people who were important would discuss things and make decisions, etc., do business, whatever it might be. That was the way society worked. So some of the Epicurean and Stoic philosophers also conversed with him, and some said, "What does this babbler wish to say?" Others said, "He seems to be a preacher of foreign divinities because he was preaching Jesus and the resurrection." And they took him and brought him to the Areopagus, saying, "May we know what this new teaching is that you are presenting, for you bring some strange things to our ears, which we wish to know, therefore, what these things mean." Now all the Athenians and the foreigners who lived there would spend their time in nothing except telling or hearing something new. We'll come back to that. So these are Epicurean and Stoic philosophers. Over here is a tiny little picture of the Areopagus that still exists. Let's see if I can get that up on. Not a real good and clear picture, but that is the Areopagus. Still exists today. But let's talk about the Epicurean and Stoic philosophers. Okay, and we've got over here definition, kind of a quick synopsis of what the Epicureans believed. Epicureanism, sounds like a disease, was a system of thought that asserted that there was no connection between people and the divine. This belief was expressed in a desire to seek contentment and satisfaction and to avoid pain and discomfort. So you've got that school of philosophy, and there were many schools of philosophy. I studied all of these schools of philosophy when I was in college, and there's so many of them, and they're so hard to keep track of, but that's what the Epicureans believe. There's no connection. Think about that. There's no connection between the human and the divine. And we might think, why would the spiritual entities that are seeking to lead us astray have any interest in that? Well, they're more than happy if people believe that there's no connection between the worldly, the material, and the divine. Remember, all they're concerned about ultimately, all that those who oppose God, those from the heavenly council who have rebelled and been cast down, all they care about is that we're misled. Because if we're misled, they win. That's the way they look at it. And they will package deception in a multitude of forms, almost countless forms. It doesn't matter what the teaching is, as long as it leads you away from the light and into the darkness, because they own the darkness. That's their real estate. That's where they want you. So you can have the Epicureans who believe that, and then you can have the Stoic, and we're more familiar. I mean, we know a little bit about, Epicureanism it's about pleasure and happiness and those things. But how about the Stoics? Stoics were all about logic. We think about being stoic, and there's an image that comes to mind. Ultimately, Spock in Star Trek, right? It's just logic, but there's more to it with the Stoics. And listen to this. Stoicism was founded by Zeno in the 3rd century BC, complete opposite to Epicureanism. Stoicism contended that the physical universe is empowered by a reasoning force known as logos. Logos. As in the beginning was the Logos, and the Logos was with God, and the Logos was God. And interesting, isn't it? Which connects the divine with the material. The Logos is that thing that really is the defining principle of everything. Ethically, Stoics attempt to live in accordance with the natural laws that they have observed and systematized. So you got two opposite ends of the spectrum here with the Epicureans and the Stoics. But with the Stoics, they believe in this force, and it's very much like, and we talked about this in John 1 when we talked there, this force that kind of is there with everything. That's straight George Lucas Star Wars stuff. That's where he got it, okay? And he would say he brought it from Eastern mysticism and all of that, which is the same kind of concept. When Jesus said he's the Logos, he's the Word, he's saying, I'm the defining principle of everything. I'm the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. I am he who causes to be, Yahweh. All of that together is what Jesus is. That's his territory. That's his role. And it's more than what the Greek Stoic philosophers believe. So these are the people Paul is speaking with, and understand this. Athens is like, I'm trying to think of something in our world today. It's with the elite in New York and how they view themselves as being those who are in the know. They look at everybody else as lesser because we're the intelligent ones. We're part of this community. They had a council called the Areopagite at the Areopagus. They were the smart ones. They were the elite. They were the enlightened. They were the ones who enlightened others. And if you're Satan, and the minions, not minions, the underlings who serve him, the other B'nai Elohim, the fallen sons of God, if you really want to deceive people, convince them that they're the ones who know everything. They're the arbiters of truth. They're the judges of what is true and what is not. They look at others as lessers. How can the people who rule this world today, and I will be careful about going into specifics because I want to be able to put this video on YouTube as well. The people who can do the things they do to young ones, the people who can do the things they do to the people of their own country, using the powers of nature to bring that about. Think about recent events. How can they do that? Because they look at them as being less. They look at them basically as being subhuman. They're the ones who are enlightened. They're the ones who are in connection with the real power of this world, and everybody else is just dupes. And if you're too dumb to get with the program and follow with them, well, too bad. You get what you get. Kind of like the way we treat chickens or hogs or cattle. Yeah, it's lousy. It's lousy. They live in the conditions that they do, and the modern agricultural agribusiness and how those animals are treated. Yeah, too bad for them. Too bad you're stupid and you're a chicken. You could be one of us and be enlightened and elite and the ones who really know truth and have the power. There is a heartlessness that comes along with being elite. They think they're better, and that means they think you are lesser. And it didn't matter if it was the Epicureans, who didn't believe there was any connection between this world and the divine, or the Stoics, who thought they had defined it and understood it, and they were the ones who really knew what the Logos was. And if you'll sit there quietly and pay attention, we will enlighten you. Okay? They thought Paul was an idiot. That's what it says here. What does this babbler wish to say? And it's really interesting. And I'm not picking on the translators for using the term babbler, but what it really means is what the word literally was seed picker. This guy kind of bounces from place to place, and he's picked this idea up here and that idea up there. It was someone, it's the way they would speak of someone who wasn't formally educated. He didn't go to Oxford. He didn't go to Yale. He didn't go to MIT. He's just self-educated, and he's picked things up here and there. But he could be entertaining. Let's listen to him. That's exactly what they thought. And again, that view of being the elite, looking down at others, putting them down. We've got a picture of our own world here today. The people who put on costumes and pretend they care about us every 4 years, who are really just puppets themselves. Make no mistake, none of those people make any decisions. Those decisions all come down from on high through the approved channels, and it's not Epicureanism or Stoicism. It's these world elite organizations, World Economic Forum, which is just the latest entity, all of these different powers, and I could run pictures across the screen of Skull and Bones and the World Economic Forum and Council on Foreign Relations and the United Nations and the Club of Rome and the Chatham House, all these different things. They're just the channels through which the dictates come down from on high, okay? But Klaus Schwab, he's one of these guys, okay? It's the way it works. It's the way it works. Different guises and disguises, same role. And they hear Paul, and they think, this could be fun. We could listen to this guy. He's a preacher of foreign divinities. He was preaching Jesus and the resurrection. He was preaching the one way of salvation, introducing them to the one true God, and they thought he might be kind of fun to listen to. May we know what this new teaching that you are presenting is. For you are bringing some strange things to our ears, and we wish to know, therefore, what these things mean. We will deign to allow you to speak before us today. Entertain us. Because why? All the Athenians and the foreigners who live there, because anybody who wanted to be anybody, if you want to be anybody, you don't live in Clodhopper, Iowa. You don't. You go to New York City. You go to London. You go to those places to be somebody. Because if you make it there, you can make it anywhere. Thank you, Frank. Right? It's up to you, New York, New York. He sang about it. He was just an entertainer. Now, all the Athenians and foreigners who lived there would spend their time in nothing except telling and hearing something new. It's what they did. And they had schools of devotees who followed them, who basically supported them. They paid to learn from them how it worked. What do you think that Plato did for money? He had people who were his students, his disciples, who followed him and listened to him. For Aristotle, it was different. He made his money by being paid by Philip to educate Alexander the Great. He had a good gig and a very capable student. All right. So Paul's going to address the Areopagus. So Paul, standing in the midst of the Areopagus, said, Men of Athens, I perceive that in every way you are very religious. For as I passed along and observed the objects of your worship, I found also an altar with this inscription, To the unknown God. What therefore you worship as unknown, this I proclaim to you. Paul just walked in. They all gathered around. And there was never a more august assembly that Paul spoke to. These are all the Rhodes Scholars of the world, the professors, the dons of Oxford and Yale and Harvard, all those people in one place. And Paul just walked in and spoke to them. Let's pop that picture up again. It doesn't have that many people in the picture, but that's who these people are that Paul is addressing. And he just walked in and said, "You don't know what you're really worshiping. Let me tell you who it is." That's bold. They called him a seed picker, a babbler, an interesting guy who's probably got some intelligence from out in the sticks, and it could be fun to listen to him. He just told them they don't know anything. He did it in a very careful, respectful, non-insulting way. But if you look at what he says, listen to it again. "Men of Athens, I perceive that in every way you were very religious. For as I passed along and observed the objects of your worship, I found also an altar with this inscription, to the unknown God." They were covering their bases just in case there was one they missed. "What therefore you worship is unknown, this I proclaim to you." You have to have a hook. You have to have a hook. If I go to speak to someone and we have no commonality, okay? And I have struggled with this. This is something outside of theology, but just having lived overseas in a different culture as a missionary. Me and my family, we lived in Lima, Peru. And unless you've done that, it's not the same going and living on an army base in the Pacific, because you're there in that army base. You're not immersed in the culture, and it's just different. There aren't points of commonality. There's not a lot really of things of substance that I can feel like I can adequately convey to you about having served in the capacity that I served in, because unless you've done it, if you've been a missionary, we're going to connect. We're going to be able to talk. And if you've gone and lived somewhere, whatever capacity, Peace Corps, whatever, that we're going to have points of commonality and we can connect. Without a connection, where do you start? I can start babbling and I'll sound like a seed picker, right? Everywhere else that Paul went earlier in this section, where did he go? He went to the synagogue. That's easy. Let's open it up. Let's go to Isaiah 53. Let's open it up. Let's go to Genesis 12. Let's go to David. The Lord said to my Lord, "Sit at my right hand until I make your enemies a footstool for your feet." Boom. You got a connection point, a hook, right? Boom, right there. We can start. He didn't have any of that with these people. But Paul was a master teacher. He was a master teacher who had learned from the master teacher, Jesus, who would take a seed, who would take a tree, who would take a lost coin, whatever it would be, a lost sheep, and preach a sermon from it. Take what they know and connect. Use that, okay? That's what good teachers do. Think about the best teachers you ever had, and there aren't many of them. I have had many teachers. Only a few of them were truly good teachers, but they did just what I was talking about. Paul didn't have the connection he had with the Jews here. He had to find something, and it was there. It was one of the things that provoked his spirit. It worked him up. They're worshiping everything, and they even throw in an unknown God. Now, he wasn't going to vent that ire and frustration with them, but he's going to use it as the connection. "What therefore you worship is unknown. This I proclaim to you." I'm the one with the truth here. He didn't say that. You want to tick people off? Start off with telling them they're wrong. You want to get nowhere and just have an argument, and all an argument does is reinforce them and their beliefs, because that's what you push them to do when you argue. That they're going to find ways to reinforce where they are. It becomes a contest. Paul didn't want a contest. He wanted open ears. Open ears. It's how you say it. "What therefore you worship is unknown. This I proclaim to you." You've wondered what I am, who I am, what I'm about, and why I'm here. And we'll tell you. Now, here comes Deuteronomy 32. Here it comes. You ready? And what follows? "God, who made the world and everything in it, being Lord of heaven and earth, does not live in temples made by man, as he stood there next to a temple made by men, nor is he served by human hands as though he needed anything, since he himself gives to all mankind life and breath and everything. He's describing the Lord God Most High. And we won't get into comparatively what these different religions, Greek theology would have taught about the origin of things. He's saying this is the way it is. There's one God who made everything. He made it, spoke it into existence, and he made from one man every nation of mankind to live on all the face of the earth right away. Here come the nations. Here come the nations. From one man, all the nations of the earth. And he did. They all came from Adam, having determined allotted periods for the boundaries of their dwelling place, that they should seek God and perhaps feel their way toward him and find him. It was always God's desire, had the B'nai Elohim, the sons of God, done their job, it was always his desire to bring these other nations back into the fold, but he had to save them all. But listen to this, having determined allotted periods and the boundaries of their dwelling place. When the Most High gave to the nations their inheritance, when he divided mankind, he fixed the borders of the peoples according to the number of the sons of God. I told you, we're right there. It is what Paul is talking about. It is exactly where he is going, having determined allotted periods and the boundaries of their dwelling place, that they should seek God. Always his desire to save, and perhaps feel their way toward him and find him. Maybe these people, being under the tutelage and shepherding of these other divine entities, would long to have the one real true divine entity who is over it all, and they would seek and find him. Yet he is actually not far from each one of us. And now, he's not going to quote the Psalms. That'd mean nothing to them. He's not going to quote David or Isaiah or Moses. He's going to quote their own philosophers. This first one is probably from Epimenides of Crete, a well-known author. Just like quotes from whoever it might be. My mind's drawing a blank. The guy who wrote On Walden Pond, or Robert Frost, these kind of things. That's all he's doing here. He's pulling up authors that they know, that Paul knew. Why did Paul know them? Because Paul was an educated, well-read, articulate individual. In him we live and move and have our being. That's from a heathen, but it's true. In the one true God we live and move and have our being. Him who is the beginning and the end, the first and the last, he who causes to be the Logos. As even some of your own poets have said, now we're going to come to Greece. He quoted someone from Crete, that's that island in the Mediterranean. Now he's going to go to a Greek philosopher from Aratus's poem called Phenomena. As even some of your own poets have said, for we are indeed his offspring. We are the children of God. He has redeemed us, inherited or reclaimed us, adopted us again after we rebelled, but he's using their own philosophers and authors to get their attention. Being then, now he's going to get to the point, being then God's offspring, we ought not to think that the divine being is like gold or silver or stone, an image formed by the art and imagination of man. We're not going to get into here what Paul and other people of their day understood idols to be and how idols worked. But we do know this, and we'll say this, the Lord High God never wanted to be represented by an idol. You can't represent me but with an idol. But an idol can't be the conduit for you to communicate with me. You can't represent me. I'm he who causes to be. The times of ignorance God overlooked, but now he commands all people everywhere to repent, reclaiming the nations, all people everywhere. It's no longer just for Israel, because he has fixed a day in which he will judge the world in righteousness by a man whom he has appointed. And of this he has given assurance to all. Here comes the hand grenade, by raising him from the dead. That's the one they're not going to, whoa, wait a minute. What is this? Completely outside of their frame of reference, their understanding of anything. Most of them are going to go back to thinking that he's some whacked out seed picker who's walked around, walked too much, been in the sun too long, and read too many books without somebody to guide him and enlighten him and give him tutoring. Now, when they heard the resurrection from the dead, some mocked. They just laughed. And they wouldn't pull any punches about laughing at you in a forum like that. They mocked him. But others said, we will hear you again about this. The word had effect. He's there with the Oxford Dons and the Rhodes Scholars and the professors from Yale and Harvard and wherever else you want to pick. And he delivered the word without fear. And think of it. We look at Paul and we've got him up on the pedestal, right? He's the Apostle Paul. In his day, he wasn't looked at that way. These people certainly didn't look at him that way. It's really surprising. It's a God thing, as we would say it today, that he got to speak there at all. But he did, and he spoke boldly. He wasn't in your face and telling them they're all wrong, but he preaches the truth, he proclaims the truth, and he preaches Christ crucified. And what's the result? Some of them are going to mock. There are always going to be those who mock. Oh, that everyone I had ever preached the gospel to believed. Not the way it works. But the Lord accomplishes his purpose, and his word achieves that for which he sent it. And often in places and ways that we would never have believed. But others said, we will hear you again about this. He got their attention. There was interest. The Spirit was working with what he said. So Paul went out from their midst. But some men joined him and believed, among whom were Dionysius the Areopagite and a woman named Damaris and others with them. Now, to us, Dionysius the Areopagite, that means? What doesn't mean anything to us. Context, setting, digging into it and understanding what's there. He's an Areopagite. He's a member of the council there. They had an actual council. All kinds of people could go there. And then there was the inside clique, the ones who probably decided who would speak, when someone would speak, what they'd listen to, what they wouldn't listen to, other important decisions like every other organization and entity. There were those who ran it. This guy, Dionysius, and it sounds very Greek and Areopagite-ish, doesn't it? He was a member of the council. Dionysius the Areopagite and a woman named Damaris and others with them. Interesting. And we shouldn't miss this. Luke, his gospel, and Luke wrote this, right? Of Acts. That's Volume 2. Volume 1's the Gospel of Luke. Volume 2 is the book of Acts. Luke is the gospel that, among other things, they all have their kind of trademarks. They're the emphasis, right? Luke is the gospel of women. That's some of the most important work we can do, making sure that they understand this world as being what it is, and understanding that in spite of how evil and sick and twisted it may appear to be, and it is, that Jesus always wins, and we're called to be faithful. We're going to stop there. Hope that these teachings, I hope that it is a blessing to you. If it is, share it. Yeah, click that thumbs up button. But the address of this video and post it in your social media, bookmark it, keep it, so that when people are talking about these things and you want a platform to get them thinking about it, you can send them this video, point them to this video. That's how the word spreads. That's why I'm putting it out here for you. This is Matthias 76. Together, we are decoding the deception. God bless and have a great day.